Hi, thanks so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Jessie Peterson. I'm the Director of Education here at SunRay Construction Solutions. SunRay secures $10 billion annually for GCs, subs, and suppliers. We are a national construction document service. Today's webinar is conducted by the incredible William Porter, a California construction lien law guru. Today's webinar topic is statutory construction releases. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the fabulous and wonderful William.
Jessie, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Since we're going to do 20 minutes, so let's just move right into this. Okay, next slide. Okay, there's a little bit of a legal disclaimer. What we're saying is that, hey, we're trying to put a lot of information into a short presentation, so there's exceptions to everything. And if you get into a situation where you're not sure, just get a hold of someone who does construction law. Our office is in Sacramento, but there's plenty around. Here's a little bit about me. You can check that out later. It doesn't really help you too much. So we'll go to the next one. Thanks. Okay, now let's talk about the forms. In California, there are 4 types of construction release forms. You have to use these forms and no other forms. You also can't change them. Okay, they are either conditional or unconditional. They're either for a progress payment or they're for the final payment. If you want to look at all the forms, you can go to California Civil Code section 8132 to 8138. And those are easy to find. At the bottom of the screen there on the left, you see a little web address, but you can just put in California Civil Codes and then you'll find it pretty quickly. And then you would look at 8132 to 8138. And let's talk about the 4 types of form. Let's go to the next screen. Okay, we're going to describe each of the 4 forms. Now, the first one is if it's a progress payment, when there's a succession of payments and somebody wants to pay you, but they want to make sure that you release your right to have a lien or a stop payment notice or a payment bond claim. So they're going to ask you to sign, when they give you the check, an unconditional waiver and release on progress payment. Now, oh, I'm sorry. No, it's the conditional. I was reading a little too far. This is the conditional waiver and release on progress payment. Now, it's conditional because they're going to give you a check. Maybe when you give them that, they'll give you the check. Maybe they'll give you a check and you need to be sure that it clears the bank before you start calling it unconditional. Okay, so the condition is that they're going to give you a check and hopefully the check will clear. But if it doesn't clear, then you really haven't given a waiver and release that sticks. It's conditional on the check clearing. So this first type of waiver and release, the conditional waiver and release on progress payment, is just for the exchange of a check that you're not sure is going to clear. But if it does, then you've waived your claims to a mechanics lien, a stop payment notice, and a payment bond claim. Okay, next slide, Jessie. Okay. Now, if there's a progress payment and they've given you the check and the check has cleared the bank, then they might ask you for an unconditional waiver and release on progress payment. It's like the conditional. It's basically saying, okay, the check has now cleared and my waiver and release of all my lien rights and stop payment notice rights and payment bond rights are waived to the extent of what you put on the form. And we'll look at the form in a little bit. We'll look at all 4 forms. Okay, so those are the two that we've done for progress payments. And then if the project continues on, you may have a series of these progress payment, conditional and unconditional releases until you get to final payments. So let's go to the next slide on that, Jessie. And that'll be if the final payment has only been promised or they gave you a check and it hasn't yet cleared the bank. And be cautious on this, because I see a lot of people often will want an unconditional waiver and release on final payment in exchange for a check or for a promise for a check. But here's the problem with giving an unconditional waiver and release on final payment. The problem is that what if the check doesn't clear? Well, then you've still given an unconditional waiver and release. That's why you have to use a conditional waiver and release on final payment in exchange for the check or when you don't know if the check has cleared yet. Okay, and we'll look at that form too. So let's go to the next one, which is the final type of form. And this is if you, the claimant, we'll say you're the claimant, really you're kind of the potential claimant for what you're owed. Like if you had to file a lawsuit, you'd be the claimant, or if you recorded a lien or a stop payment notice or a payment bond claim, you'd be the claimant. And then later on, you'd probably have to file a lawsuit if you still weren't paid. But anyway, so we're talking about the unconditional waiver and release on final payment. Basically, if you're giving this, it is saying, okay, we finished our work, we got paid, and the check cleared the bank. Although I'll say this, that even on that form, there's an exception for, let's say that you have an unresolved issue. You can release everything except for that unresolved issue, even with the unconditional waiver and release on final payment. But we'll take a look at the forms now. And you can see for each of these, you see the code section that applies, like at the end of the paragraph. And you can look those up. And in California, you're only supposed to use these releases, these 4 releases, and no other. And they're not supposed to be changed. And they have certain rules if you read the statute. And I'll mention that I see contractors coming from other states, and they have other releases that they use, and they try to use them in this state. But I think your job as a contractor or a subcontractor or a supplier is to tell these people, look, these aren't allowed in this state. I guess if you guys from another state want to use it, fine, but you know what? They have no effect here. And so that would be your legal argument. People should use the proper forms, and there's only 4 of them. Now, let me add one more thing before we go to the next slide, is that there is another type of release, but it's different. If you have an actual lawsuit and you have to have a settlement agreement, then you're going to have a release that is part of the settlement agreement. Okay, but that's when you settle a whole lawsuit or a major dispute. If you're just running the construction project from your offices, then you use these 4 forms. When lawyers start getting into the picture later on, if need be, then there's another type of release that is just part of a settlement agreement, which is a full-blown thing that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 pages, depending on the situation, long. And there's other things, but these are the 4 to use for construction. Okay, thanks, Jesse. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here is a form of conditional waiver and release on progress payment. It looks just like this. It doesn't require a notary. Sometimes people say they want it notarized, and I say, okay, well, it's not required by law, but it doesn't really hurt anything. And if you have a notary in your office, then what the heck, make them happy and do it. And it's probably good to have someone in your office, if it's of any size, just go do the notary thing and become a notary. It's not a big deal. Okay, so you can see from the form, the name of the claimant, that's you, the name of the customer, that's for your customer, the job location, the date, and then the through date. Now, the through date is really important. What it is saying is that you're going to release all your claims for mechanics liens, stop notices, and payment bond claims for all the work you performed through that date, or materials you supplied through that date. Okay? Pardon the cough. And then below that, this language is required. And then below that is who made the check, the amount of the check, payable to, and then there's some exceptions. And you can see the exceptions. Can you make that larger on the screen, Ariel, or do I have to do it myself? Because it's hard for me to read that. No, I have to do it myself. That's fine. Okay.
I don't think that we can make it larger. I'm sorry.
I'm doing it myself. Okay, it was just small. So you can see that accepted from this are retentions. So like, let's say they save 10%. That's not included in this. Extras, for which the claimant has not received payment. These would be things like change orders and perhaps disputed issues. And then also below that, if you've already given one of these conditional waivers and releases, that's where you would note right there, hey, I gave one last month on this date for this amount. Okay, and so it would be like, oh, last month I gave a $20,000 conditional waiver and release, but I haven't gotten paid, and now you owe me $30,000 more. Should I put $50,000 for this release, or 20 or 30 or what? And instead, you would do it for the, let's say, 30 that you're owed now, and then below down here you would put in the 20 that you did one of these for the previous month, let's say, that you still haven't gotten the money. So looking at both of them, you can see the total amount owed is 50. And then also it notes, and number 4 there is kind of a legal issue. Okay, even though these releases release your rights to a mechanics lien, stop payment notice, payment bond claim to the date listed that you list, and for that amount of the check, it doesn't mean that you don't, or that you lose your contract rights. So let's say you totally mess up this conditional waiver and release and you put the wrong amounts down or the wrong date, still you can go back to your contract and sue for contract rights that you have, despite all this, which merely waives lien, stop notice, and payment bond claims. Okay, just to note. And then at the end, you sign it. You don't need a notary. Put your title and the date of the signature. Okay, let's go to the next one, Jesse. So the next one is an unconditional waiver and release on progress payment. Basically, it's like the last one, but what it's saying is that the check has cleared the bank. So it's basically the same information. And then down there, it doesn't release any retentions, extras, contract rights, etc. So basically, the only difference is you're saying, oh, thank you, the check has now cleared the bank, and I will give this to you because now the condition has been satisfied. The check has cleared the bank. A lot of times these are requested because with the conditional one, more or less legally, it becomes unconditional when the condition is satisfied. So a lot of times this unconditional waiver and release on progress payment isn't even requested, but it's part of the program, and sometimes people want it. If there's banks and things like that, they often want all the different forms of these 4 forms that you can provide. Okay, let's move on to the next form, which is for the final payment. So this is, let's say you're going to get your final payment, and you can see how to fill out the form. This one, since it's conditional, remember, it's used in exchange for a check or a promise for a check. Someone says, send us a conditional release and we'll send you a check. That's all fine, and that's how all this stuff works. And you can see in filling out the form, the name of the claimant, that's you, the name of your customer that's going to pay you, the job location, and who's the owner. Okay, and then who makes the check, the amount of the check is payable to you, and then exceptions. Now this part is different and important. Okay, this document does not affect any of the following. Now remember, you're at the end of the job. You may have, let's say, one change order that there's a dispute on. Maybe they said, do this extra work and we'll figure it out later, and maybe they gave you a directive, or maybe you did the work and you don't have a signed change order, but shoot, you did the work and they told you to do the work, and so there's something disputed down here. So you would put in there something like a dollar amount, and then you would say something in the nature of, for disputed change order number 3, or on the issue discussed in email of 10/24/2024, something like that, just to identify everything is resolved except for this one issue. Okay, and then you would sign it, etc. So that way you would have a conditional waiver and release. They would give you that check, and you'd only have this one issue hanging out there that you're yet to resolve, and then you would turn probably to your contract, and you'd look at it and you say, okay, what are the methods that we have to use to resolve this? Do we go to arbitration? Do we do a lawsuit? Do we have to do mediation? I will say this, although it's another subject, that don't forget, you have, with these lien, mechanics liens, stop payment notice, and payment bond rights, you have a lot of short deadlines, and this is the kind of thing that is something that you need to go to another seminar on to understand. Like, for example, with a mechanics lien, it'll be in California. If there's a notice of completion and you're a sub, you may have as quickly as 30 days to record a lien. Or if you're the prime contractor, 60 days, or if there's no notice of completion, it could be 90 days. And then you have to file a lawsuit 90 days after that. So pay attention to these deadlines, because they could come up on you. And even though you're resolving all these issues, maybe this disputed issue, don't miss your deadlines, because the owner is waiting for you to miss your deadlines. But that's another subject, but it's so important. I wanted to mention it in this because it's kind of the next thing that happens. in the progress of trying to get paid when you're not paid. Jesse, let's move to the next slide. Okay, now here's the one that everybody wants. Contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, owners, banks, everybody, because it means it's over and everything hopefully worked out. But it's the unconditional waiver and release on final payment. It says basically that, okay, we got our final payment and the check cleared the bank, and I'm going to give this to you and we're done and I'm walking away, although there are some exceptions. Okay, again, the language on here is as it always has to be, and it shouldn't be changed. Okay, you can see the identifying information. It's like the other ones, the name of the claimant, the customer, the job location, who the owner is, and then the basic language of the unconditional waiver and release. But again, we have exceptions. Okay, disputed claims for extras in the amount of, and then it says, this document does not accept, it's kind of a repeat here. In the actual form, there's not a repeat, and Jesse, you might note that and take it out of the presentation where it repeats itself. Anyway, though, if you have disputed claims, you would right there, you would put your disputed claim in a short explanation of the whole thing. Okay, now, if the job is truly over and there are no disputed claims, what people like to see in that $ space, they like to see the word 0. So you would do the whole thing, you would put 0 there, you'd sign it at the end, and basically if it says 0, it means that everything worked out, everybody got paid, there's no disputed issues, and the situation is done and over. So that would be the end of the job for you, and you would just move on. If you put anything other than 0 there, you still got a disputed issue that you have to work out. And what I would say on disputed issues, I should mention this too, is that there is the time period between when the job finishes. In California, it's when the job finishes that start the deadlines. But there's a period of time, either 30, 60, or 90 days, when you have disputed issues. And that's a really good time to get that thing worked out. And if you don't get it worked out, then you're going to have to record your lien, stop payment notice, or payment bond claim. Although you don't have to wait till way out there at the end of the deadline, especially if whoever owes you money is going to get paid in full in that time, because then your stop payment notice wouldn't be any good because there would be nothing to stop. So anyway, I would advise that do everything you can do to resolve your disputed issues before you have to file a lien or see an attorney, because once you go down that path, expenses start to increase rapidly, and you want to avoid it. At the same time, when you do have to go see an attorney, don't call them at the last moment. I was talking to Jesse before you all were on the line, and we had somebody come to us last night. Their lawsuit is due today or maybe tomorrow, and that is not a good situation. And a lot of times, if you go to an attorney, they'll just say, "I can't help you," just because of the time factor. In this one, there's other issues, and we'll be able to help them with some good advice, but it's not a good thing to do. So watch your deadlines for mechanics lien, stop notices, and bond claims, and see the next. I'm not sure what the date it is, but see the next seminar that might be coming up in weeks to come. That hopefully Jesse will introduce me, and then I will be able to present to you. What's the next slide, Jesse? Questions. So we're
yep, that was a good place for you to be able to wrap up, Bill. So thank you so much. Okay, so yes, we do have a question that came in. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bill. You're incredible. I really do appreciate you. We do have a question that has come through. It says, can a GC require you to sign an unconditional in exchange for the check?
You know, I think that is totally improper. Now, I know that there are some programs that are pre-done programs with outside third parties, and those often request an unconditional waiver and release. But I know that those programs, as far as I have seen, tend to hold that until they pay you and the check clears. So some of those outside programs do very well at that, even though they kind of are requesting you to give something that you're not entitled to yet. But I know that the GCs do that. And if a GC is doing that directly without a third-party payment program, that I would not do it. I would say, look, no, I am not going to give you an unconditional waiver and release in exchange for a promise of payment, because you know what? If I give an unconditional waiver and release, I am saying that I am paid, and that is something that can't be retracted, and banks will rely on it, other people will rely on it, and basically I will have given up all of my lien and stop payment notice and payment bond rights, either for a check that never comes or even for a check that bounces. And so even if you get a check, you shouldn't give an unconditional until you're sure that the check clears. So my answer to that is it's not okay if it comes from anybody but a third-party payment program, which sometimes requests it. But I think, honestly, I think that they do so improperly. But they generally are good on their word, and then they pay you. But I wouldn't do it directly with owner, GC, or anybody.
Right. Okay, and then another question that has come through, it says, are all 4 forms required? We currently only work with the first 2 and the last, but not the conditional final.
Yeah, that no, none of them are actually required, and I think that using them is a just a part of a relationship between subs and suppliers and GCs and owners, and if they are requested, then provide them. But if they're not requested, it's no big deal. I mean, if you're the party that is issuing them, then great. Okay, you haven't given up your rights, but I mean, you're probably not going to sue on something if you don't need to. So no, you don't have to use any one of them. But if you are requested to provide one, then do so, but only if it's the proper one. Like, don't give a conditional, or I'm sorry, an unconditional in exchange for a check that might bounce, or in exchange for a promise to send you a check. Only give the conditional release. But yeah, you don't have to use all 4 of them. You don't have to use any of them. But if you're requested, then do it.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for answering that. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that have come in so far. If anyone does think of a question that wasn't addressed, please feel free to reach out, and I'll be sure to answer any questions as soon as I can for you.
Yeah, and if you need to call me and just say you were at the seminar and you didn't understand something, feel free to give me a call. I'm easy to find. Just put like William Porter, attorney, Porter Law Group, anything like that. You'll find me.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so on this slide, we've got all of the SunRay resources to help you guys stay organized, know your deadlines, and secure your lien rights. So go ahead and scan that QR code to access these incredible resources. You can use our project information sheet that will help you get the information right at the beginning of your project of what's required, who your customer is working for, what their role is in the job, if there's a bond on the project, if that applies, kind of what's going on. It will help you kind of stay organized. So check out all of those resources on our site. All right. If you don't mind, take a moment to review us on Google. We'd really appreciate it. It takes about a minute of your time, but it helps other contractors like yourselves to hear about us, and it also helps us with the feedback and learning what other topics you potentially would like to learn about and hear about in our next upcoming webinars. All right, and with that, that is all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much to everybody that attended. We hope to see you guys at our next webinar. Again, Bill, I can't thank you enough. You really are incredible. Everyone keep a lookout for our 2025 webinars that will be coming out shortly. I know Bill will have several of them on there. I hope you all have a wonderful and beautiful sunny day. Thanks, everyone.